The world knows Mike Tyson as one of the most ferocious fighters to ever step into the boxing ring. A man whose fists carried the weight of thunder, whose presence alone sent shivers down his opponent's spines. But beyond the knockout power and intimidating aura, there's another battle won that wasn't fought under the bright lights of Las Vegas, nor settled by judges' scorecards. This wasn't a fight between men, but between a man and something greater than himself. A struggle not for titles or belts, but for truth, identity, and purpose. And at the heart of this battle stood Islam. Tyson's life has been anything but ordinary. Raised in the harsh realities of Brooklyn, molded by violence, hunger, and survival, he was a product of the streets long before he became a product of the ring. By the time he was a teenager, he was already feared. The ring became his sanctuary, and his fists became his voice. Under the guidance of QD Amato, he was transformed from a troubled kid into an unstoppable force, a warrior with a singular mission to destroy anything in his path. And for a while, that mission defined him. But what happens when the mission ends? When the roaring crowds fade, when the gloves come off, when the very identity you built crumbles before your eyes? What happens when the world that once cheered for you no longer recognizes you? For Tyson, the fall was as dramatic as the rise. He went from the youngest heavyweight champion in history to a man lost in the chaos of fame, fortune, and controversy. The money that once seemed endless disappeared. The entourage that once surrounded him vanished. The distractions, the temptations, the self-destruction, it all caught up. And in those darkest moments, when the world only saw the headlines, he was searching for something deeper, something that could make sense of the turmoil. It wasn't in the fame. It wasn't in the fortune. It wasn't in the women, the cars, or the mansions. It was in the questions he had been too busy to ask when he was on top. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? It was in this moment of crisis that he encountered Islam, not in the ring, not in the gym, but in the silence that followed the storm. It didn't come to him with the force of a punch or the rush of a fight. It came in whispers, in moments of reflection, in words that resonated deeper than anything he had known before. At first, it was just an idea, something to explore, something that intrigued him. But the more he read, the more he listened, the more he found himself drawn in. There was something about Islam that spoke to the warrior in him, yet at the same time, it calmed the chaos within. But faith isn't just a decision, it's a battle of its own. It's one thing to knock out an opponent in the ring. It's another to face the doubts, the whispers, the resistance within your own mind. Tyson had fought men bigger than him, stronger than him, more experienced than him. But now, he was fighting himself. The man who had been built on aggression, dominance, and destruction was now confronted with submission, not to another man, but to something far beyond himself. Could he let go of his past? Could he embrace a new identity? Could he truly find peace after a life built on war? The world saw Tyson as a fighter, but inside, he was still that kid from Brooklyn, searching for something real. The question was, would he find it? Or would he remain trapped in the same cycle, another legend lost to the ghosts of his past? This is the battle no one saw coming. Islam vs. Mike Tyson. And it's a fight unlike anything he's ever faced before. The transformation of Mike Tyson wasn't something that happened overnight. It wasn't a single moment, a single prayer, or a single conversation that changed everything. It was a series of encounters, a slow unraveling of the man he had been and the man he was becoming. There were times he resisted, Moments when his old instincts took over, pulling him back into the world he had always known. After all, how does a man who has spent his entire life conquering suddenly submit? How does someone trained to destroy learn to surrender not to an opponent, but to something unseen, something spiritual? Tyson had always been a man of extremes. When he fought with everything. When he partied without limits. When he lost control, he lost it completely. There was no middle ground, no balance. And so, when Islam entered his life, it was no surprise that the struggle was just as intense as any fight he had ever been in. Some saw his newfound faith as a phase, a desperate attempt to reinvent himself after hitting rock bottom. Others believed it was genuine, that this was the real Tyson finally emerging. But deep down, even he wasn't sure. He was drawn to Islam's discipline, its sense of purpose, the way it demanded self-control and humility. But those were the very things he had spent his life rejecting. The people around him didn't all understand. Some encouraged him, telling him that Islam could be his redemption, his way out of the chaos. Others questioned it, whispering that he was too wild, too damaged, too deep in his old ways to truly change. And then there were those who wanted him to stay the way he was, the fighter, the beast, the man who brought fear wherever he went. They reminded him of the Tyson they had known, the one who could end a fight in seconds, who walked into rooms with an aura of invincibility. They wanted Iron Mike, not a man in search of peace. Tyson himself felt that tension. He wanted to believe he could change, that faith could reshape him. But what about everything he had been through? What about the anger that still lived inside him, the ghosts of his past that still whispered in his ears? He had spent years in a world where power meant survival. To let go of that was to let go of the very thing that had kept him alive. Could he really do that? Was it even possible? And yet, something kept pulling him closer. Maybe it was the words of Malcolm X, whose own journey through faith had inspired him. Maybe it was the conversations with Muslim brothers who had walked similar paths, men who had lived rough lives but found a way to transform. Or maybe it was those quiet moments when he was alone, when the world wasn't watching, when he could feel something shifting inside him. Islam spoke of redemption, of a chance to start again, of a God who forgives even the most broken souls. Tyson had broken many things in his life: rules, expectations, even himself. But was he too broken to be saved? Then there was the question of identity. Tyson had been many things: a kid from Brooklyn, a champion, a villain, an icon, a man who had been feared and admired in equal measure. Now, he was standing at a crossroads, trying to understand who he really was beyond the titles and headlines. He had spent years believing that his worth came from being the toughest man in the room. But what if true strength wasn't about dominance? What if it was about restraint, about patience, about something deeper than brute force? The very idea challenged everything he had built himself on. And just when he thought he was beginning to understand, the world tested him again. Old habits die hard. Temptations don't disappear. The past doesn't let go so easily. There were moments when he felt himself slipping, moments when he questioned whether he was capable of real change. The battle wasn't just between Islam and Mike Tyson. It was between who he had been and who he was trying to become. But the real fight was still ahead. The world had seen him knock men out in seconds. But could he defeat the toughest opponent of all, himself? The answer was coming. But not yet. Not now. Because before he could win, he had to survive the war within. The real battle didn't happen in the ring. It wasn't fought under the flashing lights of sold-out arenas or broadcast to millions around the world. It happened in silence, in the dead of night when no one was watching. It was in those quiet moments, when he was alone with his thoughts, that the real fight took place. He had been a warrior his whole life, but this was a different kind of war. No gloves, no referee, no clear opponent. Just a man trying to wrestle with his own soul. And in that struggle, the past came creeping back louder than ever. There were nights when he sat in the dark, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of his past pressed down on him. The pain he had caused. The lives he had hurt. The rage that still lived inside him, coiled like a snake, waiting to strike. Could faith really erase all of that? Could a man like him ever truly be forgiven? These were the questions that kept him awake. And just when he thought he was making progress, life threw a punch he never saw coming. One evening, after leaving the mosque, he was approached by a man whose face he didn't recognize, but whose eyes burned with something familiar. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a quiet intensity that made Tyson's instincts flare. The man wasn't a fan. He wasn't there for an autograph or a picture. His voice was steady, almost too calm when he finally spoke. "Do you think you can just walk away from who you were?" Tyson felt something shift inside him. It wasn't a threat, not in the way he was used to. It was something deeper, something unsettling. The man wasn't just questioning him. He was challenging him. For a moment, Tyson felt the old fire rise, the urge to push back, to remind this stranger who he was. But then, just as quickly, another thought crept in. Was this a test? A warning? The man didn't wait for an answer. He simply handed Tyson a folded piece of paper and walked away. Tyson watched him disappear into the night before slowly opening it. The message was short, but it hit harder than any punch he had ever taken. "Your past isn't done with you, are you?" The words haunted him. Who was this man? Was he someone from Tyson's old life? Someone he had wronged? Or was this about something more than just the past? Was it a sign, a message, a reminder that transformation wasn't just about belief, but about facing everything he had buried? The days that followed were restless. He trained harder than ever, as if trying to fight off the thoughts clawing at his mind. The discipline of Islam gave him structure, but the fear of his past kept gnawing at him. He had tried to escape it, to move forward, but maybe true redemption wasn't about running. It was about turning around and facing what he had left behind. Then, the unexpected happened. A name resurfaced. Someone from his darkest days. Someone he never thought he'd see again. A man whose life had been changed by one of Tyson's most violent moments. A man who had every reason to hate him. And now, after all these years, he wanted to meet. Tyson wasn't sure he was ready. But something told him that this meeting, this confrontation, might be the final test. The question wasn't whether he could fight it, was whether he could finally let go. The past had come knocking, and this time he couldn't ignore it. The drive to the meeting felt longer than it should have. Every red light, every turn, every moment alone in the car was a reminder of the weight he was carrying. He had faced some of the most dangerous men on the planet, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. This wasn't just about one man. It was about all the destruction he had left in his wake, all the pain he had inflicted, knowingly or not. He had been a force of nature, a storm that tore through lives, leaving wreckage behind. And now, for the first time, he was walking straight into it. When he arrived, the man was already waiting. He was older now, the years visible in his face, but there was something else in his expression, something Tyson couldn't quite read. Was it anger? Resentment? Or something even worse, indifference? The man had every right to hate him. He had once been on the receiving end of Tyson's wrath, a victim of his rage, of his need to prove his dominance, in a world that had taught him to strike first. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, the man exhaled, shaking his head. "You probably don't even remember me." Tyson wanted to say he did. He wanted to say he had thought about this moment for years. But the truth was, he didn't remember, at least, not in the way the man probably hoped. There had been so many faces, so many fights, so many nights lost to fury and recklessness. But he knew that didn't make it any less real. "I remember enough," Tyson said quietly. "And I know I hurt you." The man studied him for a long time, as if searching for something, some sign that the person standing in front of him was truly different from the one who had left scars all those years ago. And then, to Tyson's surprise, the man smiled. But it wasn't a smile of forgiveness, or even understanding. It was a smile of disbelief. "You really think this changes anything?" The man's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. "You think you can just find God and suddenly everything you did doesn't matter?" The words hit like a punch to the gut. Because deep down, Tyson had asked himself the same thing. Did faith really erase the past? Did redemption mean anything to the people who had suffered because of him? "I don't think it changes the past," Tyson admitted. "I know it doesn't. But I'm not here to erase anything. I'm here because I have to face it." The man scoffed, shaking his head again. "Face it? And then what? Walk away feeling better about yourself?" Tyson had no answer for that. Maybe the man was right. Maybe this meeting wasn't for the man at all. Maybe it was for him, for his own conscience, for his own peace. But wasn't that what redemption was? Owning your past, accepting it, and still choosing to be better? Then came the twist, the moment Tyson never saw coming. The man leaned in, his voice lower now, filled with something different. "You want to know something crazy? I should hate you. I should want revenge. But the truth is, I found peace before you ever did." Tyson froze. "I let go of that anger a long time ago," the man continued. "Not because of you. Not because I forgave you. But because I realized holding on to that pain was only hurting me. So when I heard about this new you, this man trying to change, trying to be better, I just had to see if it was real. And now that I have," he exhaled, leaning back, "I don't need anything from you. Not an apology, not an explanation. You were a monster back then. Maybe you still are. But that's not my burden to carry anymore. It's yours." Tyson felt something shift inside him, something heavier than he had ever lifted in the gym, heavier than any championship belt he had ever worn. All this time, he had thought he was coming here to seek forgiveness. But the truth was, he had been forgiven long before this moment. Not by the man, not by the world, but by something greater. And the only person still holding on to that weight was him. As he left that meeting, stepping back into the night, he realized that redemption wasn't about being absolved. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about owning it, carrying it, and still choosing to move forward. The past would always be a part of him. The pain, the violence, the mistakes, they wouldn't just disappear. But they no longer had to define him. For the first time in his life, the fight was over. And maybe, just maybe, he had finally won.